Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the second Regional Snapshots webinar discussing utilities. Today, we are going to do a 10 to 15 minute overview of electricity, natural gas, and broadband utilities within the city of Flagstaff. My name is Sarah Dector. I am the Comprehensive and Neighborhood Planning Manager for the city and the project lead for the regional plan update. I am not an expert in any of these topics. However, I am the presenter today because it took many experts to put this 10-minute presentation together. And so for the efficiency of time, I am this presenter, but we have people who are here on the call who will try and answer questions related to this. So I'm just going to run through the material, and when we get to the Q&A, hopefully we'll have a lot of interesting discussion. This is our third to last regional snapshot. Again, they happen most Mondays at noon. They will happen for the next 2 Mondays, so long as we're not all sick again like we were last week. You can register for them at the flagstaff.az.gov Regional Plan 2045. We also send out Facebook notices and an e-newsletter notice to remind folks. The format today is a 15-minute presentation with 15 minutes of Q&A. Everything is posted afterwards to our City of Flagstaff YouTube channel. And everything presented today is where we are up to now. And this process takes a few years to update our regional plan. And so sometimes the answers change or evolve as the conditions change in our community or in the economy. And so we are very aware that what you're seeing is a snapshot and a point in time. These in Flagstaff. Most people who live here know this, but maybe if you are not as familiar with Flagstaff, you will not know that the Arizona Public Service Corporation, or APS, produces our electricity and distributes it through the city. Unisource is a company that provides natural gas within the city of Flagstaff. And then we have currently we have two providers of broadband, internet, and phone and cable, CenturyLink and Suddenlink. And then the city of Flagstaff provides other kinds of utilities, water, sewer, and trash traditionally. But we are also working on a city broadband plan that includes the ability to provide conduit for secure internet within the city. And we'll talk a little about that today. So one thing that comes up often when we are talking about these utilities that are maybe not directly provided by the city, but provided within the right-of-way is the term franchise utility. So a franchise utility is a utility that signs an agreement with the city of Flagstaff, and these agreements look different in every state, and there are state level rules that apply to them, that they have the ability to bury their cables or utilities in the city of Flagstaff right of way. So when you sign a franchise agreement, you get some rules and fees, and those are all put into place, and then we share right of way space with these utilities. CenturyLink is a very common partner in our city, but they do not have a franchise utility. The law to require franchise utility agreements didn't exist when CenturyLink, which is has changed its name several times, but is essentially a baby bell company. If you love your utilities history, they are grandfathered in. And so they come in through a different process to request use of the city's right-of-way called a license agreement. And so every single project CenturyLink does has a license agreement with the city, where APS, Unisource, and Suddenlink have these overarching franchise utility agreements that you will sometimes see pop up on city council agendas. So I wanted to explain that because it's a term that comes up occasionally. Ray provided us this information that he's been gathering for many years as part of our energy program at the city to discuss how APS, which is talking about our electricity provider, has a goal of being carbon neutral and having renewable energy sources as 100% of our energy sources by 2050. They are working to meet interim targets, including a 65% estimate by 2030. Some of that's already been happening. The Navajo coal generating station has gone offline, and so has other coal generation. So getting that mix out of our mix of things that are coming in through our utilities is already heading in a direction that is making our electricity cleaner and cleaner. They are also building on the APS website. You can find these things. different core portfolios that focus on how to meet that 100% goal. So much like Flagstaff has our carbon neutrality plan, and we have a target of being carbon neutral with the purchases of offsets by 2030. Likewise, our partner in the electrical grid, APS, is working towards a similar commitment and making investments along this lines. So the clean energy commitment has been part of a progress. So wind, solar, building storage, all of these grid-based and source-based changes are happening, even though you don't see any change when you plug something in the wall in Flagstaff. And this is a rough estimate of their planned estimation mix and how they see it changing in the short term, just in the next 2 years. So these shifts are happening. We are not seeing all of it because we just plug in our car or our light, or we flip the switch. But these energy mix shifts are happening in the grid system, and they're part of why you'll often hear sustainability staff at the city say that the electrical system is getting cleaner and cleaner and cleaner, and why we are often pushing as a city a switch from other kinds of sources for heat and power to electricity. So this is from the APS website, and it shows how they are working across several different scenarios to meet this 2050 goal. Renewable energy still, though, in the future only makes up 53%. Storage, demand response pricing, demand side management, much like when we talked about transportation, is also a growing part of a portfolio in all of these resources. As a city, our electrical consumption, these are numbers that DC pulls together every year, and we only have a few years of data on it. But this electrical consumption in the city on our commercial side has gone down in the last few years, probably due to the pandemic. We weren't seeing commercial businesses weren't always open. And our residential use went up slightly, though not as much as the commercial kilowatt use went down. And so this may show us that over time, we can see trends that are based on bigger things than just our city initiatives, but we need to be watching and monitoring them so that we can understand how to move forward and continue to make changes to our approach of promoting wise energy consumption as a city. It's a much more complicated system to kind of explain how natural gas ends up at where we live. Electricity, people are maybe a little more familiar with, but because there's many phases in which gas processing occurs, a lot of that happens outside of the region. But all of those impacts, both to carbon neutrality and to the environment, are happening. And then they are pushed through a transmission process, which we have a natural gas pipeline that is a transmission pipeline for El Paso Natural Gas in the city of Flagstaff. And then also to storage and ultimately to consumers. So this is a pretty complicated graphic, but it gives you an idea that these resources, especially transmission and distribution, are part of the infrastructure in the city of Flagstaff and something to keep an eye on as we are doing land management planning. Consumption in the city of Flagstaff has had overall a fairly flat trend, but it has had some lower consumption years and higher consumption years. A lot of natural gas is used for heating. And so colder winters can lead to more consumption, and warmer winters can lead to less consumption. I want to switch to broadband. Broadband is what I would call an emerging utility. Often it was thought of as a thing that was nice to have. I think 2020 and 2021 showed us that it is a necessity now in most households. And the most recent bipartisan infrastructure bill has in it significant funding for increasing rural broadband and delivery of broadband to rural homes as a necessary utility that we want to see throughout a place like Coconino County. There's several types of broadband that we see. In terms of infrastructure, there is long haul broadband, which is the big lines. Like, so for instance, there's a very large line that goes from Phoenix up the hill to Flagstaff. And I think everyone remembers a few years ago, prior to the pandemic, it actually got cut by an act of sabotage. And that really eliminated internet in Flagstaff for a day or two. It really wasn't that long, but it disrupted 911. It was a very serious disruption of services. Most places in this day and age are trying to build multiple long haul opportunities to get them through major metropolitan areas so that there's redundancy in the system, much like we have in the electrical grid. And so the middle mile is also very important. That is from these major metropolitan areas. So like going from Las Vegas to Phoenix out into communities. So when long haul lines come through and around places like Flagstaff, we want to look for middle mile opportunities to get it out of that long haul line into the community. And then last mile, which is, focus also of some of these infrastructure investments that we're seeing in the 2020s, is getting fiber from the community hubs to houses and businesses throughout the community. The city of Flagstaff has a broadband plan that talks about building conduit in our right-of-way that is sized both to accommodate our city operations and wider community efforts. If you'll remember, a few years ago, there was a lot of work being done on Butler Avenue, where we were building conduit to create a smart technology system for all of the lights on Butler. So for instance, there's a traffic engineer right down the hall from my office who has a big master board, and he can see all the lights. I think, yeah, it's David's desk. So he can see all the lights on Butler and be monitoring if there's an accident or a congestion and how it can be rerouted. That conduit was built with extra capacity because when you're down there digging, you can start just running line like a needle through like a pipe or something. And you can run the line through the conduit that's already existing in the road, and that makes it cheaper and easier to introduce. So the city owning that conduit can be an incentive. The strategy that the city has for getting that kind of conduit in the pink lines that you see on this map is to create a low effort, high impact approach of when there is a construction project on that road, the conduit goes in and we know where it is. And we have the ability to both add our own uses to it and wider community uses, like supporting interconnectedness of schools and libraries and the health system in the community. And so if you visit the website broadband.flagstaffaz.gov, you will find a lot of information on how these different community partnerships and private sector uses may make use of that broadband plan. The county has a broadband plan as well that talks about rural broadband within the region and outside the region. These are open access in concept. None of this is constructed yet. You have to work through a lot of different land ownership, as you can tell, between Flagstaff and to the city and other places, and get agreements with the Navajo Nation. But this is the concept of how we would build a middle mile system that can start to serve these wider communities and ensure rural broadband in Coconino County. And so Coconino County also has this broadband initiative, and CJ Perry, I think, who's here, who's the Flagstaff IT director, also participates in that effort. So this was a very broad overview, and I know DC and CJ are going to want to answer lots of questions about it. But some things we're really curious about, this is an area of a lot of curiosity, is what is the energy generation consumption going to look like in 20 years? Will APS be able to meet its carbon neutrality goals faster because there'll be technology advances, or will it be slowed down by some unexpected hurdles that they are working towards? How is the energy going to be distributed in the region? Are we going to keep having overhead lines? Are we going to see more undergrounding of lines and investments in that route? Will we be able to provide broadband to all the residents in the region? What are our broadband and energy needs for current and future employers? This is often a thing that when our economic vitality and economic development professionals are out discussing businesses that may want to move into Flagstaff or Belmont or other places in the region, they may have minimum requirements for broadband that we may need to meet in our employment sectors, which we may or may not currently. They also want to know we also may want to be continuing to track what incentives and policies at the national and the state level could influence our energy consumption, transmission, and generation, because those policies set by the Department of Energy and set by the state and incentives provided can have a big impact on what opportunities are presented in local communities. That is all I have for Utilities 201. Now I'd invite I maybe ask CJ and DC if you want to add anything to what I just said, and then we'll go to questions. Anything, DC?
I think you did a great job of summarizing the high-level points. If there are things that people have questions about and I'm able to answer, I'd be happy to provide any additional insights.
Yep, and I would say the same thing. Great job, Sarah. I just want to emphasize, from our perspective, I know there's a lot of different municipalities that take different approaches to broadband, but from the broadband perspective, we're not looking at providing fiber directly to people's homes. I know some municipalities do. That might change as over time, but as of right now, our current broadband plan is just focused around trying to make it easy and simple for new ISPs and more competition and more areas to come into Flagstaff, as well as meet our own internal needs. So if there's any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
So questions, you can either go to the bottom and raise your hand under reactions, or you can type in the chat that you have a question and I'll call on you. I'm sorry. So if you unmuted yourself, we can't hear you asking your question yet.
Oh, I couldn't hear you for a sec.
Okay.
Thanks, Sarah. So I got a couple of questions. Looks like I'm only questioner here, so I'll go at them. The big question is, it's such a changing world. And how do you even get a handle on it? I mean, every major car manufacturer is going electric. And because of our meeting last week and our excellent article in the paper, we're all going to be heating our homes with electricity. Do you folks work with, is this an APS issue? Because, we've got charging station issues. And as I read, and I read half a dozen newspapers a day, usually just browse on the internet like everybody does, I don't see a lot of high-level planning to make sure that the copper wire between here and wherever is big enough in diameter to carry all this electricity. So are you guys part of that effort? Are you just assuming that somebody else is worrying about that? For one thing, getting enough electricity to homes that go electric for their heating. I mean, if you take a home that runs on gas now and has a gas hot water heater, a gas dryer, and a gas heater, I assume the wires got to get fatter just to the home. I'm not sure. Nobody's been able to answer that question. When we had our seminar, I asked the question and I was told that APS would increase your capacity if necessary. But just the big picture of who's worrying about this is an interesting question.
Great, Sat. Yeah, I can speak a little bit to that. Sort of a heuristic in the environmental sort of how do we decarbonize is, first you work on decarbonizing the electricity or the power sector, and then you put as many things on that clean energy as possible. So associated with that is the recognition that there's going to be increased load and increased demand on the electricity sector as things are switching. So whether it's cars or heating or other things, certainly when we talk to APS, they are anticipating that there's going to be increased load. And so when they are making their plans to have carbon-free electricity by 2050, it's not that they're going to be providing the same amount of electricity today and it's just going to be cleaner. It's that they're going to be providing more electricity and it's going to be cleaner. And certainly when you talk about the distribution systems, that's a huge part as well. It's not just bringing on more generation resources. It is about the distribution systems as well. We do know that, for many that are looking to make the sort of conversion from a mixed fuel home to an all electric home, there can be electrical service upgrades that are required either at the panel or even from the panel and beyond. APS will support the sort of infrastructure needs from like their lines to the meter in order to help residents get up to 200 amp hour service. There are quite a few homes in our town that would be at less than that, built sort of maybe in the 70s and such. A lot of the modern homes from the 90s and beyond already have 200 amp service. And typically folks are able to completely electrify their home while being on 200 amp service. It's typically not necessary to go up to 400 amp. That's usually the next jump. But the APS will support that. They're saying they won't do much in the way of supporting folks trying to get up to 400 amps. So if you're trying to have an electric vehicle and a hot tub and I don't know what else it would take to get you to 400 amp, that would be difficult. But certainly they are seeing what they need to do as bringing on more generation resources as well as working on the grid piece. We are working with them in some ways. The Take Charge AZ program is something that we've been involved in. That's being done to bring in level 2 electric vehicle charging infrastructure. It's in fact partially a pilot program so they can get data on how people or what their behavior looks like in terms of charging, and are they going to be able to do things in order to incentivize people to charge during sort of the off-peak hours when there's a tremendous amount of solar on the grid. And those are certainly questions that APS is asking, and then working with municipalities like Flagstaff to try to get some vision on and figure out solutions to move in that direction.
I think the community development staff of the city and county would consider it remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to remind everyone how important it is if you're making any of these upgrades to your house that you come and get an electrical permit. Safety is paramount when we are talking about how much of this work takes safety review. And of course, we have highly professional and trained staff. Really, the building officials in the city and county, we are very lucky because they are leaders in setting up the code changes at the national level and really are leaders in this. So if you have something you're considering doing to make these kinds of transitions, consulting with the building department in the jurisdiction where your property is a very good idea. Early, they can often help avoid errors that might cost you more later on, or hurdles, like DC said, of finding out you need a 400 amp and that you're not going to get support in that. So please remember to call your building department when you're considering these kinds of changes. Do you have other questions?
Well, we're not dealing with trash and recycling, right? That is a different day.
Scheduled right now because there's been a lot of staff turnover, and it may be something we're able to pick up again at a later date.
Okay. Well, my other question is what Elon Musk is up to. Do you guys ever hear anything about that? I mean, he wants to put 13,000 satellites in the sky, and my understanding is he would then be, that would then be the broadband system. I don't know how serious that is or what.
Yeah, so I can speak to that a little bit. SpaceX, Elon Musk's satellite company, has been putting lots of satellites in the sky. I actually have one staff member who is currently on that service right now. And it's great opportunity for people who are in extremely rural areas where there is no internet access and there's no financial model that will ever bring quality internet access to those areas. When you're talking about the needs of businesses and high-tech industry and things like that, the speeds just aren't quite there. And I don't know that they ever will fully get there just due to, laws of physics. So they provide a great opportunity for those who couldn't otherwise get any sort of internet access. There's another example of its use, and obviously there's some controversy here, but SpaceX provided internet service to those in like Ukraine who have been, without electricity and all of those things, and had to have, their internet lines were cut. So you can take that and think natural disasters and concepts like that. I know some of the initial trials SpaceX did was with some of the firefighters that are literally out in the middle of nowhere during fire season, providing high quality, high speed internet access to those. But it doesn't fully offset or replace a good quality fiber internet service. The differences on what you typically get to your home with a fiber service is in the rate of 5 to 10 times the speed. And when you talk about commercial, it's as a factor of 100 to even 1,000 times the speed. So it's helpful and it does help with internet throughout, but it doesn't fully replace what we're trying to do today.
Okay, thanks. Those are the only two that I have.
Other questions? Well, thank you to CJ and DC and all the folks at the county, Matt Fowler and others who helped contribute, and Amanda Atkinson who contribute to this very concise presentation of things that you guys are by far the experts in. So thank you for contributing that to this regional snapshot series. And with that, we'll stop recording, and thanks.